Nigeria plans to convert at least 20 trillion naira, about $45 billion in loans taken from the central bank to 40-year bonds. It's the first time it's resorted to such a move as public finances come under pressure. President Muhammadu Buhari has apparently approved the plan to convert the loans, which have mostly been taken since he was elected in 2015, to plug spending shortfalls after revenues collapsed on lower oil prices and production. It is the most Africa's biggest economy. Is it the most that Africa's biggest economy has ever borrowed from a bank? Now, amid Nigeria's tight fiscal space, the federal government has recorded a deficit of 5.3 trillion naira between January and August 2022, which is 430 billion above the prorated level. The government spent about 9.5 trillion from January to August 2022 out of 11.5 trillion pro rata expenditure projected for the period. Now, of that 9.56 trillion spent in 8 months, 3.5 trillion was expended on debt service, while 2.89 trillion was used for personnel costs and pensions. Total expenditure projected for the whole of 2022 is 17.3 trillion. Speaking during the ministerial presentation of the 2023 budget on Wednesday in Abuja, the Minister of Finance and Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, said the federal government's retained revenue was 4.2 trillion through August of 2022, representing about 64% of the pro-rata target of 6.6 trillion. All right, and of course, as we know, Nigeria does have, as far as total public debt is concerned, 42.8 trillion naira as of June the 30th of 2022. And that does not include the ways and means financing that is coming from the central bank that's been extended to the federal government. So, of course, if we look at some of the 2023 budget projections, you're seeing revenue of 9.7 trillion naira, expenditure of 20.5 trillion, which means the deficit so far, just for the budget, is 10.78 trillion naira. So deficit as a percentage of GDP, you're looking at 4.7%, debt servicing 6.31. And so what the government is looking at is to securitize the ways and means financing, which has amounted to about 20 trillion, and to spread that over the next 4 decades. So that has not been added to total debt. If it is actually added to total debt, Nigeria is looking at about a debt to GDP ratio of about 35%. Now, of course, that also doesn't include the debt servicing, which is servicing interest on the debt. Calculations, of course, that figure would rise as well. So with a deficit of 10.78 trillion naira and ways and means financing of about 20 trillion, you're looking at the extra financing, or rather extra debt from the central bank to the federal government at about 2x what the deficit is right now. Arise business analyst Chika Mbonu joins us to discuss further. Chika, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Morning.
Very great to have you, sir. So what do you make of this latest developments now as far as the securitizing the debt is concerned?
We're on this again. I mean, you know what's happening. Revenue expenditure is ahead of revenues for Nigeria. With the 8 months result that came out, up to August, we found that whereas revenue was about 64% of budget achieved, expenditure as usual is ahead at 82%. And that's the history of Nigeria. Regularly, you will find that expenditure is always ahead of revenues. And you know what's been happening? As I'm leading you to the ways and means and the securitization, because if you look at the breakdown of the revenue budget achievement for up till August this year, you find that they only achieved the oil or crude oil revenue was achieved only about 27%. And then whereas the non-oil revenue was achieved at 102%. That tells you fundamentally why we're having problems. And then, if you go take it back again, what's the problem? We're not achieving our production volumes, even though the prices are so high. So it's not surprising that is happening. And the restructure, therefore, is for the government at the beginning of the year to go out there to borrow structurally from the banking system in Nigeria, or by issuing bonds, local bonds, or even borrowing from abroad by issuing Euro bonds. But what happens is that those take time, and the climate is not very good. So what do? The law has provided that the Central Bank of Nigeria is the banker of last resort for the government. So what happens is that if the government is running short of revenues, it should actually go to the central bank and then run an overdraft there. Now, but there's a law guiding that also. It's not that they should just go there and just take any money they want. The CBN Act says that the money overdraft they're going to give to the federal government of Nigeria should not exceed 5% of the actual revenue for the previous year, 5%. And then whatever that is taken in this year must be retired before you can take another overdraft from the central bank. Of course, from the figures that we know as at March at 20 trillion, you know obviously that these laws are not being complied with. So that's the situation that we have here. What do people have against central bank is like, central bank will just say, should we bounce the federal government checks? If they want to pay the army people who are fighting the war, should we not pay? And so they have their own excuse, they have their own reasons, but they don't come out there to talk about it, explain to the citizens of Nigeria why that is happening. It's just like any day the government wants, they just go there and just go and just grab the money and just be spending. That's the impression being given. And so the ways and means balance as at March is 20 trillion. As at 8 months of August, the deficit for 2022 is already about 5.6, 5.7 trillion. Now, that figure is not even included in the 20 trillion already. So what normally happens is the 20 trillion is in the balance sheet of central bank now, and is not included in the 40 trillion plus 42 trillion, which is the total debt of Nigeria now. If we add that, so you have about 63 trillion for the federal government debt. So what the government wants to do is to sanitize this overdraft they have with Central Bank of Nigeria, issue it in bonds so that individuals and corporates will buy it, and it will leave Central Bank balance sheet, and then it will be like holding treasury bills and other and bonds that citizens are holding. And again, as everybody have been talking, what did they say? There'll be a moratorium and the tenure will be for 40 years plus. What are we saying? Our unborn children, more debts are being dumped on our unborn children, which is the story of Nigeria. One other thing that's critical from the report that the finance minister brought out for the performance up till August is that 83% of our revenues have been spent on debt servicing, and that tells you that we're running into a problem in Nigeria. This minister for finance has been known with this phrase: we don't have a revenue problem, we don't have a debt problem, what we have is a revenue problem. And throughout her tenure, she has worked very hard to expand the revenue net, but nothing has been achieved, it appears. And so it is a major issue for us. Additional debt being piled on top of the 43 trillion that we already have. And then if we add a 20 trillion and probably the one for this year about up to August, you can know the amount of debt that we're going to be carrying.
Arise business analyst Chika Mbonu. Chika, thank you so much for your... Okay, we're going to be going actually to the Lekki toll gate to keep up with the events that have been unfolding there. So, let's go back to Chika for a second, because I think we're still having, but we're going to be getting up to date updates on what's been going on there. Chika, we still have you. Okay, Chika, very quickly, sorry, because we've got, of course, it's the 2-year anniversary of the events at the Lekki toll gate, and so, but Chika, what does this mean for the next administration in terms of being able to manage this debt? Chika, quickly if you can.
Because it's going to be a problem again. Remember the 2023 budget again, about 11 trillion in deficit. Nowhere you can borrow internationally now because the outside is not favorable. Oil prices are not increasing. Our silver bullet will be if Mbonu succeeds and restores our production up till about 2 million barrels a day, and the oil prices still hold strong at $100 per barrel, then we may have some salvation there. But it's going to be difficult for the new administration. The only way I see forward is, but the opportunity to borrow is going to be limited. The only way I see forward is for them to cut expenditure and introduce some austerity. And then, of course, remove that thing that we all know, which is the subsidy.
Arise business analyst Chika Mbonu. Chika, thank you so much for taking us through those headlines. We appreciate your insights as always.